The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. We sang that in the psalm this morning. And this can be a difficult concept for us as modern people to get our mind around, especially because many of us grew up inside religions based on fear, or were raised outside the church to believe that religion was all about fear. Fear if you do this, fear if you don't do that. The image of God generated by that is like the Greek god Zeus sitting around on Mount Olympus, thunderbolts in hand, ready to smite anyone he's displeased with. But in Hebrew thought, fear of the Lord is not about punishment. If you look at the content of the rest of the psalm, it's not about quaking and quivering, it's not about reward and punishment. It's all about God's majesty and splendor, God's faithfulness and justice, about how God feeds us and provides for us. It may seem strange to us to end with the statement, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. But it's not the kind of fear we're used to in our culture. This is not the fear of war or terrorists or crime. Those are all fears we bring upon ourselves as human beings. In Hebrew thought, fear of the Lord is a reaction of awe and humility before a God who is like us, yet unlike us as well. We know we're made in the image of God. That's what Genesis tells us. But yet we are not God. We as human beings can be faithful and we can be just. But unlike God, we're not unwaveringly faithful or unwaveringly just. And when we stand before the person who's the source of all beauty, justice, and love, and shows them in perfection, we should be in awe. Fear of the Lord is an honest reaction of a human being who admits that he or she is not God. And properly applied, it does not paralyze us, but instead moves us to action. In the Old Testament, fear of God is worshipful remembrance that moves us to just living that's often associated with kindness to the poor and to the stranger in our midst. According to the psalmist, it's the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom acquired without a base understanding of our status with God, without this proper fear of God, is ultimately useless. Sometimes it's even dangerous. Paul warns us in the epistle today, knowledge puffs up. Now, Paul is not opposed to learning. He was trained as a Pharisee. He had an advanced degree in philosophy for his day. And he reminds us that knowledge puffs up, but love builds up. Paul is trying to convey to Greek Gentile believers his intrinsic Hebrew understanding that fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. In ancient Greco-Roman culture, much as in ours, knowledge was highly prized. It helped determine your place in society. Many Greco-Roman religions were based in belief in a secret knowledge. In Greek, the word is gnosis. If you had that knowledge, you were enlightened. If you didn't, you were in the dark. So these people who believe in gnosis, Gnostics, have always been with us. It's always an undercurrent in human thought. And it's very attractive, especially to intellectuals. We can be enlightened by acquiring yet one more degree. Gnosticism is still a strong tendency in the world today. Scientology is a Gnostic religion where you're purported to get as much enlightenment as you can pay for. Most self-help books exhort you that if you only know this secret technique, hereto unknown, you can be enlightened. Even some modern Christians, when they use words like my Jesus, infer that they have some sort of secret knowledge of who Jesus is that others don't. But Paul sticks to the classical party line of Judaism and Christianity. It's not about the knowledge you have. It's about faith. It's not about facts that you can repeat back. It's about relationship and about community. Because I can know every tidbit of information about a person, but that doesn't mean that I know who they really are. Knowledge in itself, without the understanding that love conquers all, is pointless. Paul continues with an example that seems arcane, but actually has some interesting application. Paul is talking about meat sacrificed to idols, and there is an untruth in that statement. The whole thing about food can't bring you closer to God. Obviously, Paul never had good chocolate. But we're talking about a different situation here. I mean, if you lived in a city of the Roman Empire at the time, you were completely surrounded by paganism. It influenced it was part of the government. It was part of your society. It was part of every act that people committed. And part of that was how you would get your meat. I mean, there were not butchers as we think about them today. If you wanted meat, you would go to a temple and acquire the meat from a temple, because it's actually very logical. Why would you just have a butcher shop that would butcher the meat when you could have it sacrificed first to a god and get the benefit of it being sacrificed to the god, and the god wouldn't eat the meat, and you get the meat. So you get double duty out of what you're doing here. It actually makes a lot of sense if this is your mind, the way you think about it in your mind. So the question then becomes for Christians who don't believe that these gods exist: can we eat this meat that's sacrificed to the idols? You know, the only other way you're going to get meat is if you happen to have a Jewish kosher butcher in your city, and those are few and far between in the Roman Empire. So Paul says that we know that the idols don't exist. There are no other gods. There is only one God. So this meat that's sacrificed to idols is not really sacrificed to idols. But the rub comes when we interact with other people. Even though the Christians of Paul's time know that the idols don't exist, would somebody who was watching them eat that meat that was sacrificed to idols know that Christians didn't believe that idols existed? Or would they assume that since they're eating the meat, that they believed and were following those gods, those false idols? So for Paul, knowledge has to be tempered by love. You can be completely correct in your facts, but wrong in your application. To use political language, just because you have the right to do something doesn't mean it's the right thing to do. And this kind of flies in the face of much of our thinking in an information-based economy where technology and information are considered to be inevitable. This attitude might be best embodied in the statement by J. Robert Oppenheimer after the detonation of the first atomic bomb in 1945. He quoted Hindu scripture saying, "Now I have become death, the destroyer of worlds." And the men and women of the Manhattan Project spent a lot of time debating the morality of what they had created. By 1948, Oppenheimer had come to a spiritual understanding of what the project had done, and he wrote, "In some sort of crude sense which no vulgarity, no humor, no overstatement can quite extinguish, the physicists have known sin, and this is a knowledge they cannot lose." There is not a single decision that we make as human beings that's made in a moral vacuum. We are all interconnected. Some of our smallest choices can have effects like ripples in a pond. And Christianity says that interconnectedness is part of who God is in our doctrine of the Trinity. God doesn't need us to exist, but God chooses not to be God without us. And human wisdom and learning are wonderful things. They reflect part of our image of God. But when we allow our knowledge to overcome love, then we have twisted that image. This is simply a corollary of do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And it's important to make the distinction here between love and being nice. You know, one of the most loving things I've ever read in my life is King's letter to white clergymen from the Birmingham jail, where he's very clear about the fact that he respects and loves them, but is very challenging. Love isn't always about being nice. Sometimes it's about being challenging. As Paul says elsewhere, "If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal." And with our technologies, especially in biology and genetics, we need to weigh what the effects of those technologies are. And in our moral arguments, whether we're talking about things like abortion or human sexuality or capital punishment, we need to be concerned not only about the facts of those arguments, but the way in which we carry out our debate and how it builds or destroys community. In our daily interactions with each other, we need to evaluate whether our words are intended to help or our words are intended to hurt. Fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and a person who is truly wise is one who puts love above all other considerations. Amen.